Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to Researcher's Desk. Today, I have the enormous pleasure of welcoming Christina Fredengren, who's going to talk with us about deep time. I've had the pleasure of co-teaching with Christina, and Christina's taught me an awful lot about the humanities and the enormous relevance of the humanities to climate. And those of you who've seen my lectures, quite a lot of the things I use in my lectures are actually things I've been taught by Christina. For example, the oak tree analogy from V. Singza is Christina's. So Christina is absolutely my teacher. I hope you're going to enjoy listening to her just as much as I'm going to. Christina, welcome to Researcher's Desk. I'm going to turn my own camera off so we get a really nice recording. I'm also going, if anything technical isn't working, I'll suddenly appear. So you don't need to worry. You just go right ahead and share screen, and we'll get started. Welcome to Researcher's Desk.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and I have been thriving in your and Kevin's academic and friendly company, both during field trips and teaching. So now let me see. So topic of today is deep time, and the plan for the talk is that I will introduce you to the environmental humanities, which is an emerging university topic that has relevance to climate matters, environmental matters, and who we are and might be as humans. I'm going to run through what deep time is and why we should actually care about deep time. We're going to discuss the Anthropocene in geology and in the humanities. And I will open up a few little kind of windows towards the type of research that is going on in the environmental humanities. We will talk about deep time interventions and trace the politics of the long term. And we will land in some time philosophy around transtemporal entanglements. So here we go. First of all, the environmental humanities is a broad and new topic. And as Deborah Bird-Rose and others have talked about in the first number of the Environmental Humanities Journal, is that it works with topics such as meaning, value, ethics, justice, and the politics of knowledge production, i.e. How do we actually produce what is worth knowing, and how do we actually attest to such knowing? And by bringing humanities into questions around the environment and climate, we can try to deal with a much kind of denser, thicker notion of humanity. And maybe start to question the kind of standard version of man as a self-contained, rational and decision-making subject. I.e., there are kind of challenges with understanding humans as isolates, both in time and in relation to other beings on this planet. And instead, environmental humanities tries to investigate how humans are participants in quite lively ecologies of meanings and valued, and that they are kind of entangled, i.e. kind of braided together in lots of different ecologies that are quite diverse around the globe. And in the environmental humanities, one often investigates not how you sort of become as an individual, but how your life is conditioned on becoming together with others. And how does then environmental humanities work? Well, I suppose one works with trying to apply humanities questions and methods to research in environmental matters. And the humanities of the environmental humanities is of the kind that meets quite well with the natural sciences. And one can say that this topic exists between philosophy, literature, gender, anthropology, artistic research, archaeology, and history studies. And it deals with matters of power, justice, and inequalities, not only focused on the human, but also including sort of matters of justice towards more than human beings, animals, plants, trees, rivers, waters, air, etc. And in doing this, it also provides a historical and philosophical perspective on natural and social sciences and questions subject boundaries and hierarchies of knowledge. Because as Alasdair often talks about, we're dealing with quite wicked problems today. And for that, we can't kind of sit in our own kind of ivory towers, but we need to find wicked solutions that takes in knowledge from many different subject disciplines. And here we want to address the ethical problems related to environmental issues. Some researchers deal with garbage and waste, radiation toxicities, or technological developments such as cloning or artificial intelligence, etc. And here on the PowerPoint, you see some of the books and journals within the environmental humanities, like the Cambridge Companion to the Environmental Humanities, the Environmental Humanities Journal, and a book that I contributed to it's called Environmental Humanities, a rethinking of landscape archaeology, that takes in the agency of the modern humans. So, about time. Deep time itself is a topic within the environmental humanities. And here to the one side of the PowerPoint presentation, you can see one number of the Environmental Humanities Journal that dealt particularly with deep time. It was called Unexpected Encounters with Deep Time, Enchantment, Violence and Haunting. And that stemmed from a conference at Edinburgh University that I participated in. And I produced a paper kind of before this kind of joint publication. And my paper was in World Archaeology and was called Unexpected Encounters with Deep Time, the materializing powers of these junctures in time. And what on earth is this kind of fascination with deep time in the humanities? Well, it's about a history writing that deals with the dynamics of history and geology together, but it doesn't stay in the past. As Michel Bastian and some other time philosophers write, they want to encourage another type of deep time storytelling that place the current concerns into a much larger flow of planetary histories and futures. That both kind of shake our normal narrative strategies that are quite linear, that goes from before to after, and then start to kind of see what type of moral imaginaries and understandings do we actually get from thinking over longer time stretches. And deep time in the humanities can also be a noticing of the encounters with deep time. And that is partly what I'm writing about in that World Archaeology paper. And that is how a meeting with deep time materialities and also archaeological materialities can be deeply effective. And here, I just wanted to draw your attention to the kind of discovery of deep time. Back a couple of hundred of years, back some 100 years ago, and a little bit more, when the biblical temporal narrative of the age of the earth, this thing that if you count what it says in the Bible, the earth was created in the year 4004 before Christ. But this was challenged by the Scottish geologist James Hutton, who observed the deep stratigraphy on some exposed rock at the Scottish sea cliffs, and then realized that the Earth was not constructed some maybe 4004 BC, but that it was actually a lot older. So one can really sort of feel in how the world all of a sudden changed upon this kind of experience of deep time. And then one can sort of move from this thing of knowing that deep time exists and that the planet is so much older than what was written in the Bible, which of course shook the biblical narratives in many different ways. One can also sort of, why should we actually care about that? Yeah, first of all, Earth has a multi-million year history and deep time is very real. But as Sen argues, deep time also provides a framework against which we can measure change and understand the rate with which the planet can replenish its resources, i.e., how long it takes for the planet to heal itself. And one need to note that many such healing processes are a lot slower than our very fast consumption of our earthly resources. And we also need these kind of longer time scales to compare the processes of these kind of millions of years to human time scales that runs within a decade or so. And this is important for those who plan and make decisions on the use of Earth's resources, as they need to understand the different scales of time that they have to kind of observe in order to act more wisely for sustainable futures. And here on the picture, we have the Visingsö rock formation that I visited together with Alasdair and some others a couple of summers ago, where we see this deep time layering of the rocks. As many of you know, we are living in really environmental challenged times. And some have suggested that we should call the times we are living in today the Anthropocene. It's a period or an epoch of global warming and humanly induced climate change. It's the time when we experience the sixth species extinction. There is an ongoing unsustainable consumption of resources, and the human is not only human, but also a major geological actor on the planet. Then there has been a big question on whether we should call these goings on a new geological epoch that follows after the geological epoch, the Holocene. The word itself, the Anthropocene, is derived from the Greek word anthropo for man and scene new, so the new time of man. And this is indeed a time when human activities, i.e. anthropogenic action, significantly have affected the planet's geology, hydrology, and ecosystems. And it's the time of human-driven climate change and environmental depletion. Some researchers, such as Salasevich of the Stratigraphic Commission, have been trying to identify geological markers for the Anthropocene, to find things that both geologists and us as archaeologists have in common, this thing that we're trying to look for traces in the earth of change. And here, they have been trying to figure out sort of what markers do we find in the ground to show that we have actually left one epoch and entered another. And some of these markers could be, for example, layers of plastic or concrete or black carbon soot. It could also be the presence of plutonium, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxides, i.e., our industrial age leaves remains on the planet that we could call lastings, because they will be around there for deep time futures. But then a lot of researchers have started to ask the question, when did this presumed epoch start? Here we have the scientist Will Steffen and the colleagues that have looked at different curves, like the rise of carbon dioxide, the nitrous oxides, methane, surface temperatures, the marine fish captures, or the amount of domesticated land. And they have found that all curves actually peak around the 1950s. And that is what they have called the Great Acceleration. And then this could possibly be regarded as the start of the Anthropocene. But then others have said, was it really there? should we not sort of say that the start of the Anthropocene, this epoch of extreme climate damage, did it not start earlier? Did it start kind of with the deadly colonization of the planet in the 1600s, or the buildup of anthropogenic soils? Or did it start already in the Neolithic, i.e. in the Stone Age, when people started to domesticate crops and start with earth engineering? And there hasn't really sort of been any consensus with regards to the start date. How far do we actually need to go back in time to say that these kind of planetary change started? Then this question was put to the Anthropocene working group, who presented it to the geologists and said, look it, we have a proposition that the Anthropocene epoch started here around the 1950s. And should we not actually vote for this? And the proposition of the Anthropocene was actually rejected by the geologists, and a couple of members voted against it and some voted for it. But what we need to be very clear about here is that it's a question about putting a name on an epoch and deciding when it actually started. And that there is no doubt about that there is irreversible damage to the planet that is attested to and documented. And also, we need to heed that the Anthropocene is accepted by the scientific community at large, and that there is scientific evidence for climate change. And the layering, this thing that we can actually find Anthropocene layers in our planet, on our planet, that is completely clear and completely beyond doubt. And the big debate is sort of when it started. From a humanities perspective then, one is saying that we actually need other tools than a geological spite, albeit such a thing is important too. And the geological spike, that is actually one of these little points that are put in to the geological layers, where you can sort of see that there's a change in time and in the layering. So, what type of tools would we actually need? Yeah, we need something else, says Sue Todd, for example, in Nature, that capture what the world is experiencing in terms of climate crisis. And it's clear that the Anthropocene has moved from being primarily a geological concept to a social and humanistic concern. It is now also a cultural concept used to capture an era of accelerating human impact on climate change and biodiversity loss. And within the humanities, several researchers such as Donna Haraway and Andreas Malm have discussed if we should also call this Anthropocene epoch maybe the Plantationocene, to describe that it's about monocropping and an unsustainable use of soil and human labor, or the Capitalocene, where they look at the kind of impact of the economic systems of today. And Donna Haraway has talked about the Cutolocene, meaning that we need to call this epoch down to earth a little bit. And what she means by this is that we need to tell both the kind of big stories, and we need to kind of ground ourselves in local stories where we can sense the kind of effects of the Anthropocene in order to grasp these extremely sort of big upheavals and changes that we are going through. Something else that is of interest with regards to the Anthropocene and the goings on right now is that it questions a little bit sort of what it means to be a human. And coming kind of from the humanities, that is one of our kind of main questions. How can we understand humans in different ways, in different cultures over time? And one thing that has definitely been proven kind of by the anthropogenic action on the planet is that we have a really unstable category of the humans. Humans have actually a stronger geological agency on the planet than rivers, volcanoes, and tectonic plates. i.e. humans and human action, not all humans, but some humans can actually push around more materials kind of across the globe than many natural processes. And what humans do today and have done since the 1950s affects the climate for extreme long-term, deep-time futures. So, hence, how to perceive a human given that we are in this Anthropocene epoch? Well, human action builds up as a major geological force, i.e. humans are not only cultural actors but also natural actors. And we can also notice that human action spreads out not only during our lifetime but far beyond that. Things we do today affect far futures. Human action also spreads out spatially. So you don't only affect your kind of near environment, but your actions actually, for example, in the use of fossil fuels, spreads out and cause problems quite far away from your geological existence. So the human kind of spreads out both in time and in space, long over the kind of boundaries of you as an individual. So the take-home point from this is that we need a much wider understanding of what a human is and can be, and that we need a new response to the crisis of ecology, economy, and politics, and ways of learning about the world, the epistemologies, that deals differently, not only with what a human is, but also with time and temporalities. I have in my studies focused on something called deep time interventions. And in this, I have surveyed and talked to people about things that they do here today that affects our futures. And when I've been lecturing and been out on different workshops with this, I ask sort of what is your kind of temporal effect in your life? And can you notice any deep time interventions in what you're doing? And people have come back to me, for example, saying this thing, oh yes, I use the plastic bottles kind of here for the water. That means that I'm depleting Earth's resources, but also by throwing this away, I increase the kind of garbage mountains that we have around us and I affect far futures. Someone came in at a workshop I had at a festival in Stockholm city center. And they said, oh, I'm really mourning the cut down of the forests in Italy because the trees that they used to make the Stradivarius violins from are no longer about. So one can never ever create such violins again with that particular sound. Someone else, some young kids came by and they said this thing, oh well, but we're actually fighting for climate change and we're making a positive deep time intervention, trying to change things, trying to turn things around a little bit. And I thought that was a really nice contribution to my inventory of deep time interventions. But I think deep time interventions are important in other ways too, that we need to highlight what is the politics of the long term. Here you can sort of see pictures of some nuclear power stations that definitely intervene in the choices that future generations can have. And we need to start to discuss when societies make these deep time interventions more widely. How are future generations tied in by the choices we make today? And what will be the effect on their life worlds? Here I have learned from Alasdair about slow deep time processes, such as the carbon cycle. I'm not going to go into any deep detail about that, but it takes some 100 to 200 million years for this cycle actually to go full circle, with the weathering of rocks that transports into rain and rivers, that put CO2 to the oceans, that get deposited in limestone, that eventually turn into magma through volcanic eruptions and expose CO2 in the air that again then be taken up by the rocks. I just wanted to highlight the deep time intervention that is being done by entering into the fast carbon cycle, where you disrupt this extremely slow kind of process of weathering CO2, volcanic eruptions, and CO2 in the air by taking up fossil fuels from the limestone layers and below in the oceans. So by the use of fossil fuels, you're actually disrupting the cycle and making a deep time intervention. So I think we need to continue to kind of think about sort of what we do here today that infringes and territorialize the future. Some environmental humanities scholar that has done this is Rob Nixon. And he has written a book that is called Slow Violence and the Environmentalism of the Poor. And he asks the questions, in the Anthropocene, are we all in the same boats? Are all humans equally situated and exposed to climate change? And of course, that is not the case at all. The death count in the global south is on the rise. Many people are exposed to these environmental challenges already now. And I think here in Scandinavia and in the Western world, we will feel and we are experiencing climate change to quite some extent. But for others, what they call the climate apocalypse has already happened. There are indigenous communities, there are communities at risk that is already living in climate havoc. And this is something that has been written about by environmental humanities indigenous scholar Kyle White. There are several unexpected and cascading effects of environmental change. And this is what Rob Nixon, through the use of words, i.e. a humanities tool, has captured as slow violence. And here he talks about how climate change is actually a type of violence that builds up by small individual actions, industrial actions, but it's violence that stretches over generations. Slow violence could, for example, be captured as toxic legacies, climate change, etc. But I would like to also, of course, say that this is a deep time violence, but then one can also ask, learning from these kids that came in on the festival I was speaking at, could we also start to talk about deep time care and how we can care for both the generations that are today experiencing the damage of climate and environmental change, but also think about future generations, and then including not only humans, but also other living beings. A contribution from the humanities is that we also need other ways of discussing temporal relations. For example, the materialization processes of environmental change do not always work in predictable linear ways. We can think of cascade effects, the unforeseen sequence of systemic destabilizations of events that follow an intervention, perhaps a deep time intervention. We can also talk about temporal relationships across time. And I have in my research tried to kind of figure out new temporal operators, new temporal words, such as the transtemporal, to capture when we have several processes that produce the now and project into the future. And what I mean by that is basically this thing that for me as an archaeologist, it's not that strange to actually say that I have kind of processes kind of from the Stone Age or Bronze Age or Iron Age that have produced the world that I'm living in today. but I don't need to divide them always kind of into the Stone Age, Bronze Age, or Iron Age, but they're actually here, just kind of beside us right now. And there are several kind of processes that project at different kind of temporal depths kind of into the future. And I wanted a word that kind of captured this thing, that we are actually living in a lot of different times at the same time, so to say. I hope you're with me on that, and otherwise you will have to ask questions when we break up the lecture. With this, I wanted to highlight that there are some temporal processes that we are aware of, and others that we might have paid less attention to. I think one can sort of talk about temporal entanglements, that the present consists of many times and temporalities. And in this, I think we also need to be better at talking about time and materialization processes. We might need to start to train our language in capturing this a little bit better. We might also want to learn from indigenous knowledge, because Westerners, us Westerners, often have a temporal orientation that is also kind of spatially linked. Often we think that we're facing the future and that the past is somewhere there behind us. But learning from Aboriginal Australians, one can actually look at it differently, as they do. They think that they are facing the past, backing into the future, with a face towards their ancestors that they have some sort of responsibility towards. And we are hence differently kind of temporally oriented. And drawing on this knowledge, anthropologist Deborah Bird-Rose in this Anthropocene Noir paper says that our past is now racing towards us from the future. It forces us to abandon the illusion of immunity and confront seriously the processes that we have been triggering. And I think this is really wise words when it comes to understanding the situation we are in the Anthropocene and beyond. We could, with some temporal philosophy and literature, say that time is actually out of joint. The take-home points from what I've been talking about here could easily find some resonance with Hamlet, where we have this line, "O cursed spite, that ever I was born to set it right." We need to acknowledge that we make deep time interventions and territorialize futures. We need to look at temporalized material processes that act out of joints. There are kind of lingerings from the past, there are lastings, but there are also processes that lie there as latencies that might be kind of triggered by kind of smaller interventions that we do. And we're moving into an epoch that is less easy to predict. We might need to learn to live with this uncertainty and find other ways of approaching the world. And from a humanities perspective, we need to examine different time philosophies, improve our temporal literacy and vocabulary, and carry out research possibly differently too. If you want to hear more about these thoughts, we're actually having a couple of courses at Stockholm University in the environmental humanities. And now in the autumn, we have environmental humanities and deep time, and environmental humanities and human-animal-nature relationships. These are courses at advanced level, they're open for late application, and if you have a candidate in any subject and English 6. I also want to welcome you to our higher seminar in the environmental humanities. It's now called the Green Zone. And we actually have a lecture already tomorrow between 3 and 5, where ethnologist Lotten Gustafsson Reinius and the anthropologist Flora Bartlett talks about life with forest loss, renewed relations and ritual enchantments. And that is about the forest fires that took place a couple of years ago in Sweden. Summing up what I've been talking about, we have mentioned deep time and why that matters. We talked a bit about climate change, deep time interventions, the Anthropocene. We highlighted how the human has become quite an unstable category, not only a cultural actor, but also a natural actor and geologic force. We have talked not so much about anthropocentrism and ecocentrism, but anthropocentrism kind of focuses on putting human goals in the center. And I think this deep time talk also talks about that we can't sort of think of kind of history, past, present, or future by also looking at the entangled relationships with the ecosystems. And we talked a little bit about slow violence. So with this summary, I am stoppa delningen and say thank you for letting me speak with you.
Thank you so much, Christina. As always, when listening to you, it's so thought-provoking, and it's going to take me a long time for all of what you've said to sink in. Thank you so much for being with us at Researcher's Desk.